Welcome to The Explainer. Get ready because today we are literally tearing down the traditional definition of what makes us smart. You know, for decades, society had this very narrow, very rigid idea of human intelligence. But what if the way we've been measuring brilliance all this time is completely missing the big picture? Well, today we're decoding a massive paradigm shift in psychology, one that fundamentally alters how we view human potential. Let's get right into it. Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to picture the early 1970s. For half a century, the intelligence quotient, the famous IQ test, was the absolute, undisputed gold standard for measuring a human mind. But what happens when the gold standard starts to fail? Well, scientists were getting frustrated. The monolithic wall of traditional, rigid intelligence testing was showing some major cracks. They were looking around at perfectly capable, incredibly successful people who simply didn't fit the mold of a high IQ. And they started realizing that a single test score, it just couldn't explain the vast, beautiful differences among individuals.
To truly understand this rebellion, we actually have to rewind all the way back to 1904. That was the year the English psychologist Charles Spearman proposed what he called the G factor. He observed that kids who did well in one school subject tended to do well in others. So from this, he theorized that there's a single, overarching, general mental ability, this G factor, that completely dominated psychometrics and education for the entire 20th century. Basically, if you had a high G, you were considered smart. If you didn't, well, the system didn't really have much room for you.
So the crucial point is the sheer contrast between these two eras. On one side, you have Spearman's G factor, a singular underlying ability heavily biased toward logic, math, and verbal comprehension, very dry, very rigid. On the other side, entering the scene in 1983, you have Howard Gardner. Gardner proposed a vibrant, multifaceted reality. He argued that human intelligence isn't just one single battery powering the whole brain. Instead, it's actually a series of semi-autonomous, modular systems of intelligence.
And what makes Gardner's framework so compelling is his evidence. He didn't just sit in a dusty room looking at standard test scores and math equations. No, he looked at incredible, real-world human phenomena. He looked at evolutionary history. He studied stroke patients. He noted how a localized brain injury might completely destroy a person's ability to speak, yet, amazingly, leave their musical ability perfectly intact. He also looked at savants and child prodigies who showed extraordinary preservation of specific talents while struggling with the most basic everyday tasks.
And this brilliantly illustrates the diverse cast of characters that make up human cognition. In 1983, Gardner published his sweeping revelation, The Theory of Multiple Intelligences. He initially outlined several distinct modalities of intelligence, arguing that we all possess them just in a unique, individualized blend. So let's take a rapid-fire cinematic tour through the incredible, vibrant spectrum of the human mind. We begin in the world of words, linguistic intelligence. This is your proficiency in spoken and written language, vocabulary, and literary expression. Paint a picture in your mind of the poet agonizing over a single stanza, or the brilliant orator who navigates and shapes the entire world purely through the power of persuasion and storytelling. Now pan the imaginary camera over from the poet to the scientist and the mathematician. Logical mathematical intelligence is the capacity for abstract reasoning, proofs, and scientific inquiry. It is absolutely vital to acknowledge that this specific intelligence is the domain that traditional schools and historical IQ tests have completely obsessed over. It's incredibly important, for sure, but as we're learning today, it's just one piece of a much larger puzzle. But what if your mind works not in numbers, but in 3D structures? Here we find the architect sketching a skyscraper, or the aviator navigating complex airspace. This is spatial intelligence. It's the remarkable ability to mentally manipulate visual spatial configurations. Someone strong in this domain can literally rotate complex three-dimensional shapes in their mind's eye to solve a problem long before they ever touch a physical object. Leaving the drafting table, we move into the physical realm of dancers, surgeons, and elite athletes. Bodily kinesthetic intelligence is the precise control of physical movement and motor coordination. What is totally groundbreaking here is that Gardner framed physical coordination not just as a reflex or muscle memory, but as a distinct, highly refined form of cognitive processing. Let's move along and see how this builds, because the mind doesn't just process words, numbers, and physical space, it dives deeply into art, nature, and the intricate web of human connection. Let's look at how Gardner expands the spectrum from the mechanical to the deeply, deeply human. Imagine the composer who hears the everyday world as a symphony of pitch, rhythm, and timbre. Musical intelligence is an entirely separate cognitive domain. This means that the ability to compose a masterpiece or perceive intricate harmonies is an intellectual feat completely distinct from spoken language or logical reasoning.
Next, we look at the outward-facing superpower of human connection, interpersonal intelligence. This is the capacity to understand, empathize with, and navigate these social motivations of others. Think of the great leaders, the empathetic teachers, or even just that one friend you have who can instantly read a room and effortlessly guide the group dynamics. That's a profound intelligence.
But we also have to turn the lens inward. Intrapersonal intelligence is deep, profound self-awareness. It's the ability to understand your own internal emotional landscape, your core motives, and your values. Gardner posits that truly knowing yourself and managing your own internal machinery isn't just a fleeting emotional state. It is a vital, highly distinct cognitive ability. Now, Gardner's theory didn't just freeze in 1983. It evolved. In 1998, he added naturalistic intelligence. This is your botanist, your farmer, your outdoorsman. It is the intuitive ability to recognize, classify, and identify the intricate patterns of flora, fauna, and the broader natural environment. Honestly, it's an intelligence that was absolutely crucial for the survival of our early ancestors. Finally, we reach the highest level of abstraction with existentialist intelligence, introduced around the year 2000. Picture the philosopher gazing up at the stars, grappling with massive abstract questions like why are we here and what is our role in the universe? It's the cognitive capacity to ponder human existence itself.
So, we've just painted this beautiful, inclusive spectrum of human potential. But as we know, science is forged in the fire of rigorous debate. And traditional cognitive scientists looked at this vibrant spectrum and asked a very cold, very blunt question. Are these really intelligences, or are they just talents?
Now, what's really interesting about this pushback is the nuance. Psychometricians, the scientists who literally measure the mind, argued that a brilliant dancer or an amazing musician is undoubtedly gifted. But they say those gifts fall outside the cognitive sphere. From their strictly data-driven perspective, these are athletic and musical skills or talents, but not necessarily distinct intelligences in the way we use the word scientifically.
And this sparked a fascinating ongoing debate. On one side, educators absolutely embrace Gardner's humanistic approach, right? Because it promotes the inherent value of every single student. If you're bad at math, hey, maybe you're a kinesthetic genius. On the flip side, psychometricians argue that when you actually create tests for Gardner's domains, the scores still positively correlate, meaning if you score high in one area, you often score high in the others. And they argue this proves that Spearman's original overarching G factor is still pulling the strings behind the scenes.
But regardless of the scientific tug-of-war, Gardner's theory succeeded in fundamentally redefining human potential. Breaking away from that single, dry, and dusty IQ number matters immensely for our personal development. It gives us a framework to understand that human capability is vast, it's diverse, and it's deeply specialized. It allows us to value the mechanic, the artist, and the therapist just as much as we value the mathematician.
Which brings us to the ultimate takeaway for you today. We all have a completely unique intellectual composition. If traditional tests and traditional schooling only ever measured a tiny fraction of human capability, you have to ask yourself, what unrecognized intelligence are you hiding? What modular system in your brain is just waiting to be tapped into? Keep exploring those unique strengths of yours. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you in the next explainer.